I am 68 years old, and after 4 decades of marriage, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I had endured poverty, the loss of friends, the passing of my parents, the uncertainty of running a small business, and the slow erosion of youth. But nothing, absolutely nothing prepared me for the moment I opened the cabinet in our bathroom and found that little jar of face cream. It looked so ordinary, so harmless, with its pearly white lid and its faint floral scent. Yet it carried the weight of betrayal heavier than any storm I had faced. That jar was my wife's favorite one she claimed to buy, for her wrinkles a small vanity. She said she indulged in after all the years she had sacrificed for the family. But when I saw the faint smudge of lipstick on the edge of the lid, not her shade, but something bolder, something that screamed of nights out and hidden desires, I knew the jar wasn't just about vanity. It was about secrets. I held it in my hands for what felt like an eternity, listening to the silence of our house. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you hear your own pulse. My wife had always been meticulous, careful, never careless with her belongings, never leaving anything out of place. Yet here was her most prized cream, left half open, carelessly tucked away, as if she had rushed. My hands trembled not because of age, but because of rage. I knew at that moment that something was terribly wrong, and for the first time in my long life, I decided I would not confront her with tears or questions. I would confront her with action. I replaced that cream with something no one could mistake, something that would force the truth out into the light. I will not tell you yet what I put in that jar, because the shock of it is what carried me through the nights when I wanted to scream. What I can tell you is this: it was no longer a beauty product, but a weapon of truth. You might think I sound cruel, you might think I sound desperate, but tell me if you discovered that the woman who shared your bed for 40 years had been betraying you in the most unimaginable way. Wouldn't you want her lies to come crashing down too? Wouldn't you want the mask she wore every day to burn away so the world could see the monster she had become? When I held that jar, I remembered the vows we made in the small church of our hometown. I remembered the priest's words about loyalty and faithfulness, and I remembered her smile as she promised to walk with me until the end of our days. But promises, I would later learn, are fragile things. They can be whispered easily in youth and broken silently in old age. That jar of cream was proof that my wife's promises had turned to dust. It was not just a symbol of her vanity. It was the evidence of her deception. I put the jar back in its place just as I found it. My plan was simple, almost too simple, but simplicity has a way of cutting deeper than complicated schemes. I knew that one day soon she would open that jar again, and when she did, the truth would not only touch her skin, it would scar her carefully constructed lies. She would not be able to hide anymore, not behind her polite smile, not behind her excuses of going to the spa, not behind the mask she showed the world. That night, as I sat in my chair in the living room, listening to the clock tick with merciless precision, I asked myself, what is the value of revenge at my age? Is it worth the risk, the scandal, the whispers of neighbors? And the answer that came from the pit of my stomach was yes, because it was no longer about revenge. It was about dignity. It was about reclaiming the respect that had been stolen from me when she chose betrayal over loyalty. I am not a violent man. I have never raised a hand against my wife or my children. I am not reckless, not foolish, not driven by youthful impulse. I am an old man who has lived long enough to know that sometimes justice does not arrive on its own. Sometimes you have to carve it with your own trembling hands. And so I prepared myself for what was to come, for the firestorm I knew would explode when she finally used that cream again. But let me ask you something. If you had discovered what I discovered, if you had seen the signs I saw, would you have stayed silent? Would you have walked away? Or would you have acted as I did to make sure that the lies were ripped open in front of everyone? Comment with the number 1 right now if you believe the truth must always come out, no matter how painful. Before I tell you how the betrayal unfolded, you need to understand what came before, because no story of treachery is complete without knowing what was lost. I met my wife when we were both young, when the world seemed wide open, when dreams still felt like promises rather than burdens. She was 22, I was 26, a carpenter's son who worked long hours with calloused hands, and she was a school teacher with laughter that sounded like sunlight. We were not wealthy, not by any measure. But when you are in love, the absence of wealth feels like freedom rather than poverty. We married in a small church, nothing grand, nothing expensive, but to me, it was the most beautiful day of my life. I wore a suit borrowed from my cousin, and she wore a dress her mother had sewn by hand. I still remember the way she walked down the aisle, her veil fluttering with every nervous step, her eyes locked on mine. In that moment, I believed the world had given me its greatest gift, and I swore to cherish it until my last breath. The early years were hard. We lived in a rented apartment above a grocery store, where the walls were thin and the winters cruel. We learned to stretch every dollar to eat rice and beans when the paycheck ran out to fix what was broken instead of replacing it. But through it all, we had each other. There were nights we had nothing but candlelight because the power had been cut, and yet we laughed holding hands across the table, promising that one day we would look back and see these years as proof of our strength. She would place her head on my shoulder and whisper that she believed in me, and in those whispers I found the courage to keep building a life. When our first child was born, a son with her eyes and my chin, I thought we had conquered the world. I worked double shifts, built furniture by hand, took every job I could find to keep food on the table. She stayed home with the baby, humming lullabies, keeping the tiny apartment warm with love. When our daughter came 3 years later, I thought my heart would burst from joy. 2 children, a wife who smiled at me every night, a home filled with noise and chaos. It felt like we had carved paradise from nothing. And every time she looked at me, I believed she was just as grateful as I was. Over the years, we scraped and saved. Eventually, I bought a small house with a yard. It wasn't much, but to us, it was a castle. We planted roses out front, she baked bread in the kitchen, and I built wooden shelves with my own hands. We had neighbors who admired us, who said we were the picture of a faithful marriage, the kind of couple people looked up to. Whenever we went to church, she held my hand, and when the choir sang, I swore her voice harmonized with mine. We grew older, but we grew together, or at least that's what I believed. When she turned 50, I remember buying her a gold necklace, the most expensive gift I had ever managed. She cried when I gave it to her, kissed me on the cheek, and whispered that she couldn't imagine life without me. I believed her. I believed every word. Because when you have shared decades with someone, when you have endured sickness, death, and financial ruin together, you stop questioning loyalty. You simply trust, because trust feels safer than doubt. But trust is dangerous. It lulls you into complacency, blinds you to shadows that lurk behind familiar smiles. Looking back now, I see the signs were always there. The way she began fussing over her appearance more than before, the late nights at the book club, that she never used to attend, the sudden interest in expensive creams and perfumes she had never cared for in her younger years. I told myself it was normal, that after raising children and sacrificing her youth, she simply wanted to feel beautiful again. I encouraged her, praised her, even bought her some of those creams myself. I never imagined those little jars would become weapons turned against me. We traveled too, though never far. On our 40th anniversary, we took a bus trip to the coast. I can still see her standing barefoot on the sand, her gray hair pulled back by the wind, her laughter mixing with the waves. I told her that day that I had no regrets, that if I had to live my life again, I would choose her every single time. She smiled, squeezed my hand, and said she felt the same. I did not know, of course, that lies can sound sweeter when they are spoken with conviction. Our children grew, moved away, built lives of their own. We became empty nesters, the two of us alone, in the house we had once dreamed of filling with grandchildren. And though the silence was sometimes heavy, I thought it was a gift, a chance to rediscover each other. I cooked for her, she brought me tea, we sat together in the evenings, watching old movies. At least that was the illusion. I see now that she had already begun to slip away, that her smile no longer reached her eyes, that her phone was always turned face down. I did not question, because who suspects betrayal at 70? Who imagines that the person you grew old beside is planning to betray the vows of your youth? If you had seen us a year ago, you would have thought we were the model of devotion. A gray-haired couple walking hand in hand through the market, smiling at neighbors attending Sunday service together. We looked like loyalty carved in stone, but behind closed doors cracks were forming. She had her secrets, and I had my blind faith. And when those two forces collided, the explosion would be devastating. And so, when I tell you about that jar of cream, when I tell you about the moment I discovered her betrayal, understand this, it was not just about the cream. It was about 40 years of memories shattering in an instant. It was about the echo of vows spoken in a church, the promises whispered in candlelight, the dreams built in poverty and struggle, all turned into ash by a single careless smear of lipstick on a lid. Now, I ask you, if you had lived 40 years believing in someone building your life on their word and then discovered it was all a lie, what would you do? Would you forgive, or would you fight for your dignity? Comment yes below if you believe some betrayals can never be forgiven. It is strange how the smallest details can grow into shadows that swallow an entire life. After 40 years with the same woman, I thought I knew her rhythms better than my own. I knew the way she folded laundry, the way she sipped her morning tea, the way she laughed with a slight snort when something truly amused her. I knew her silences and her sighs, or at least I believed I did. That belief began to crumble the day I noticed her scent was no longer hers. My wife had always worn a simple rose fragrance, soft and understated, the kind of smell that clung faintly to pillows and scarves. But one evening, when she walked through the door, I was struck by a sharp, sweet perfume that I had never encountered before, bold and almost defiant. I asked her about it, and she laughed lightly, brushing me off. It was a sample at the spa, nothing more, she said, and kissed me on the cheek. I wanted to believe her, so I did. But the perfume kept returning. It wasn't just once, not just a free sample. It clung to her coat, to her hair, even to the pillow she rested on at night. And along with the scent came a change in her habits. She started going out more often in the evenings, saying she was meeting friends, attending a book club, or running late errands. These were things she had never done in all our years together. For decades, she had hated driving at night, claiming her eyes were too weak for the glare of headlights. Yet now suddenly, she was out 2-3 times a week sometimes, until past midnight. I would sit in the living room, with the lamp on waiting, listening to the tick of the clock, convincing myself not to call her, because I did not want to sound controlling. Her phone became a fortress. She used to leave it anywhere, on the kitchen table, on the couch, on the dresser. But now, it was always face down, always locked. When a message came in, she would glance at it quickly, turn away, and slip it into her pocket. Once, while she was in the shower, I reached for it out of instinct, not even sure what I was looking for. But it was locked with a code I didn't know. After 40 years, suddenly there were codes and secrets between us. I put the phone back and told myself I was being paranoid, that at my age, one's mind invents things. But in my heart, I felt the first cut of betrayal. She became critical of me too, in ways she never had before. Small comments about my clothes, my posture, my forgetfulness. She called me old man in a tone that was no longer affectionate but dismissive. When I mentioned our anniversary, she rolled her eyes and said we had celebrated enough anniversaries to last a lifetime. It was as if the years we had built together no longer mattered to her, as if she were already living in another world where I did not exist. I remember one evening clearly. She returned home later than usual, her hair disheveled, her cheeks flushed. I asked if she had eaten, and she said yes. She had grabbed something with her book club. But when I took the trash out later, I found no wrappers, no signs of food, nothing that matched her story. What I did find was a receipt in her coat pocket for a restaurant 2 towns away, a place we had never been together, dinner for 2, a bottle of wine. I stared at that receipt for a long time, my chest tight, my hands trembling. I wanted to confront her right then, to demand answers, but something inside me said, wait and watch. It is painful to pretend you are blind when every fiber of your body is screaming that you see the truth. I smiled at her when she came home. I asked about her day. I kissed her cheek all the while, knowing she was slipping further away. At night, I would lie awake next to her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her steady breathing, wondering who she had been with just hours before. I told myself maybe it was harmless. Maybe she just needed a break. Maybe loneliness had driven her to seek companionship outside our home. But then I would remember the way she looked at me, less and less, the way her laughter no longer reached her eyes, and I knew it was not harmless. It was deliberate. Neighbors began to whisper too. One old friend of mine asked casually, "Has your wife been traveling a lot lately? I thought I saw her near the plaza the other night with someone." I laughed it off, pretended I didn't hear, but inside I was unraveling. Because once whispers begin, they rarely stop. They grow louder, they multiply, until they become a chorus you can no longer ignore. I tried to distract myself with work, with gardening, with fixing the old chair on the porch. But every time I saw her car pull into the driveway late at night, every time she tiptoed into the house with that sweet perfume clinging to her, I felt a knife twist deeper into my chest. Still, I remained silent. I knew that if I spoke too soon, she would deny it. She would paint me as paranoid, an aging husband inventing ghosts. I needed more. I needed proof so undeniable that even she could not hide behind lies. And so, I watched. I waited. I began to write down times, dates, places. I noted when she left and when she returned. I began to see patterns, Wednesdays and Fridays, always after dinner, always gone for at least 3 hours, always the same perfume. The pieces were aligning, though. I did not yet know the full picture. But one thing was certain. The woman I had shared my life with was no longer the same, and whatever secret she was hiding, it was about to come crashing into the open. Now, I ask you, when you start to notice the cracks in someone you trust, do you confront them immediately, or do you wait until the walls collapse on their own? Comment with the number 8, if you believe silence can be the sharpest weapon of all. The night it happened, the air was so still it felt unnatural, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I remember sitting in the kitchen, my hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea, the clock ticking past midnight. She wasn't home yet. The lie had been the same as always: book club dinner errands. My heart no longer even argued with her words. It simply braced for the truth. When her car finally pulled into the driveway, I stayed where I was, lights off, listening to the door creak open. I heard her humming softly as if she were a teenager returning from a secret date, not a woman who had sworn before God and our families to be mine. She went straight to the shower, and while the water ran, I stepped outside to check her car. It was a habit now, one I despised but could not resist. The first thing I saw was a small paper bag on the passenger seat. Inside was a tube of expensive face cream, the kind she had never bought before. And then beneath it, something that froze my blood. A tie. A man's tie. Dark blue silk with tiny white dots. It was not mine. I hadn't worn a tie like that in 20 years. My hands shook as I lifted it, my breath caught in my throat. I imagined her buying it, or worse, imagined someone else leaving it behind after a night together. My stomach churned. I stuffed it back into the bag and slammed the glove box shut. That was when I noticed her phone half buried under the seat. She must have dropped it in a hurry. I picked it up, half expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, the screen lit up without a code. Perhaps in her rush, she had forgotten to resecure it. Perhaps fate itself had placed the truth in my hands. There it was, a string of messages glowing in the dark like poison. My breath caught when I saw the name at the top: Daniel, my adopted son. The boy I had raised since he was 12. The boy who once called me dad with tears in his eyes when I signed the papers that made him part of our family. Now, a grown man, now someone's husband. The messages scrolled before my eyes like knives carving into my chest. I miss you already. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. Don't forget your cream, the one that makes your skin glow. There were heart emojis, laughing faces, the kind of silly, careless language of lovers who believed the world belonged to them. I nearly dropped the phone. My knees went weak. Daniel, not a stranger, not some faceless man from the city. My own son. The betrayal wasn't just hers, it was his too. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt, the walls of the garage pressing in. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a storm that had erupted in my own house. I put the phone back where I found it just as the shower stopped. She walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, her hair damp, her face glowing with that cream. She kissed me on the cheek again, the same perfunctory gesture, but I could barely feel it. My whole body was numb. I watched her walk into the bedroom, humming, oblivious to the earthquake she had unleashed inside me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to her steady breathing beside me. The messages replayed in my mind like a cursed chant. Daniel, Daniel. The boy I had fed, clothed, sent to school. The boy who had come to me broken and afraid, who I promised I would never abandon. And now he was betraying me in the cruelest way possible. The next morning I tested her. I asked about Daniel casually, as if I were only curious how he and his wife were doing. Her answer was too quick, too rehearsed. They're fine, busy with work, she said without looking me in the eye. And then, with a little smirk, she added, he's growing into quite a man, isn't he? My heart pounded so hard I thought I might collapse right there at the breakfast table. That was the moment I knew the truth wasn't just suspicion, it was real. They were together, my wife and my son. The two people who should have been my greatest allies had become my greatest enemies. And suddenly, everything made sense: the late nights, the perfume, the tie, the laughter I no longer heard in my home. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to call Daniel, and demand how he could do this to me. But instead, I remained silent. because a confrontation without proof would only bring denial and lies. I needed to expose them so completely, so publicly, that there would be no escape, no pretending, no rewriting of the story. And so, I began to plan. Every movement, every errand, every secret meeting of theirs, I would uncover it. I would gather evidence piece by piece until the weight of it crushed them both. They thought I was old, tired, finished. They thought my eyes no longer saw, that my heart no longer felt. But they were wrong. The old man still had strength, and he still had fire. Now, I ask you, if you discovered the betrayal wasn't just your spouse, but also your child, would you explode in rage immediately? Or would you wait and let the trap tighten around them? Comment with 9 if you believe patience can turn betrayal into the sharpest blade of revenge. The moment I read those messages between my wife and Daniel, something inside me died, but something else came alive. It was not grief anymore. It was not shock. It was a cold, deliberate fire that burned steady, a flame that whispered, "Gather, prepare, strike." For days I moved like a shadow in my own house. I smiled when she looked at me. I nodded when she spoke, but behind my eyes I was writing her obituary, not of her life, but of her lies. I began to collect evidence. Every detail became a piece of the puzzle: her perfume-stained coats, the receipts left in her pockets, the tie in the car, the phone calls she took in the yard when she thought I was inside. I kept a small notebook hidden under the floorboards of my study, a relic from my days in the military, when I had learned that patience and documentation could win wars. I wrote down times, dates, phrases. I mapped her movements. Wednesdays, Fridays, always after dinner. 3 hours gone, sometimes 4. Always returning with that glow on her cheeks, a smile she no longer gave to me. But my eyes alone were not enough. I needed another witness, someone trained to see what ordinary men overlook. And so, I called an old acquaintance, a man named Carter, who had once been a police investigator before retiring early. He owed me a favor from long ago, when I had saved him from a scandal that could have ended his career. He listened quietly as I explained, and then he said simply, "I'll find out for you, but be prepared, you might not like what I bring back." 2 nights later, Carter called me. "She's not at any book club," he said. "She's meeting him. The boy, your boy." I closed my eyes, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles whitened. Where I asked, though I already knew. "Miller's Inn," he replied. "Room 203. They've been there for hours." His voice was calm, but each word struck me like a hammer. I thanked him and hung up. I did not go to the inn, not that night. Instead, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at the wedding photo on the wall, her in her white dress, me in my uniform, Daniel still just a boy standing beside us, smiling, a holy trinity of betrayal frozen in time. But whispers have wings, and secrets cannot stay hidden forever. The neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street leaned over the fence one morning and asked, "Is everything all right with your wife? I see her car out late some nights, coming back at strange hours." I forced a laugh and said, "She's helping a friend," but her eyes lingered on mine, doubtful. I knew soon the entire neighborhood would talk, and I welcomed it. Because gossip is like smoke, it seeps into every crack until the fire can no longer be contained. Carter brought me photographs a week later. Grainy, distant shots, but clear enough to destroy me. My wife stepping out of her car in front of the inn. Daniel waiting for her, his hand brushing her arm. The two of them entering the building together, her head tilted back in laughter. One photo showed them through the hotel window, sitting close, wine glasses, raised his hand, resting lightly on her knee. A touch that should have belonged to me, but never did anymore. I looked at those photos for hours, sometimes with rage, sometimes with a strange, hollow calm. Proof. That was all I had wanted. Proof so undeniable that even she, with her silver tongue and easy lies, could not talk her way out. Now I had it. And still I waited. Because evidence is only power when revealed at the right moment. In the meantime, I played the role of the clueless husband. I asked about her book club. I listened to her invented stories. I even drove her once, pretending not to notice when she insisted on being dropped off 3 blocks from the so-called meeting place. As soon as she disappeared into the night, I parked at the corner and watched her slip into Daniel's waiting car. My heart should have broken then, but instead, it hardened into stone. The tension inside the house grew unbearable. We sat at the dinner table like strangers, our conversations thin as paper. Sometimes she would smile at me, but it was the smile of an actress who has already signed her next contract. Once, when I asked her directly, "Do you still love me?" she froze for a moment too long before replying, "Of course I do. Don't be silly." But her eyes betrayed her darting away, unable to hold mine. Meanwhile, Daniel began to avoid me. He stopped calling, stopped visiting. When I did see him, his voice was strained, his excuses clumsy. "Work is busy," he said, though I knew he was lying. I wanted to grab him by the collar and demand how he could do this, but I held back. Because the more they thought I was blind, the more careless they became. Carter continued his surveillance. He sent me more photos, more videos. In one clip, Daniel opened the passenger door for her, and she slid in, touching his arm with the same tenderness she used to reserve for me. In another, they walked through the park at dusk, holding hands, her head resting on his shoulder. I felt sick watching it, yet I forced myself to look. Because these images were not just evidence of betrayal, they were ammunition for justice. Then came the breaking point. Carter caught them leaving a lawyer's office downtown. My wife clutched a folder of papers, Daniel walking close beside her. Carter overheard them talking about transfers, about signing soon. It wasn't just an affair. They were planning something bigger, to strip me of everything I had built, to take the business, the house, the legacy I had spent a lifetime creating. Betrayal of the heart was one thing. Betrayal of everything I owned, everything I was another. That night I sat in the dark and whispered to myself, "They will not win. Not her, not him. Not after all I've endured." My hands were steady, my mind clear. I had evidence, I had patience, and soon I would have my moment. So I ask you now, if you had proof of such betrayal, your wife and your son conspiring not only against your love, but against your entire life, would you confront them immediately, or would you let the trap grow tighter, so their fall would be absolute? Comment with yes, if you'd wait for the perfect strike. I had imagined the confrontation 100 different ways. Sometimes I pictured myself flipping the dinner table, shouting until my throat bled. Other times, I dreamed of cornering Daniel alone, forcing him to look me in the eye and confess. But in the end, I chose something far colder, far sharper. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would let the truth speak for itself so loud that even their silence would be deafening. The opportunity came on a Sunday evening. My wife suggested inviting Daniel and his wife over for dinner, as if we were still a family. I agreed without hesitation, hiding the spark in my chest. It would be the perfect stage. Our house, our table, the same walls that had seen birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. Tonight they would witness the death of every lie. I spent the day preparing. Not food, I left that to her, but evidence. I printed the photographs Carter had given me, the hotel, the restaurant, the park. I transferred the videos onto a small drive and connected it to the television in the living room. I even placed the notebook I had filled with dates and times onto the table like a holy scripture. And finally, I slid the tie I had found in her car into my pocket, the silent witness that had started it all. They arrived just after 6. Daniel walked in, first his smile tight, his eyes avoiding mine. His wife followed, chatting cheerfully, oblivious to the storm about to break. And then came my wife, glowing with her usual rehearsed warmth. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "Thank you for agreeing to this." I nodded, my heart steady as a drumbeat. Dinner was quiet at first. Too quiet. Forks clinked against plates, shallow laughter floated across the table, but beneath it all was tension so thick it could choke a man. Daniel spoke of work, his wife complimented the roast, and my wife played the perfect hostess. But I saw it, the flicker in their eyes, the shared glances, the nervous energy of conspirators waiting for a moment alone. Halfway through the meal, I set my fork down. "There's something I'd like to share," I said calmly. All three of them looked at me. My wife's smile faltered. Daniel's jaw tightened. His wife tilted her head in curiosity. I stood, walked to the living room, and picked up the remote. The screen came alive. At first just a photo, grainy, but clear enough. My wife and Daniel entering the hotel together. A gasp escaped Daniel's wife. "What is this?" she whispered. My wife's face drained of color. Daniel shifted in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the table. I pressed the button again. Another photo, wine glasses, raised Daniel's hand on her knee. His wife covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking. He looked down, unable to speak. I pressed the button again. This time, a video. My wife and Daniel walking through the park, holding hands like lovers, her head resting on his shoulder. Their laughter carried through the speakers, a cruel mockery of every moment I had spent alone, waiting for her to come home. Silence filled the room when the video ended. Heavy, suffocating silence. My wife finally stood, her voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered. I pulled the tie from my pocket and threw it onto the table. "Then explain this," I said. "Explain the messages, explain the receipts, explain the lies. 40 years, and this is what you give me." Daniel's wife sobbed, pushing back from the table. "With your father," she screamed, her voice sharp with betrayal. "You betrayed me with your own father-in-law." The neighbors could probably hear her, but I didn't care. Let them. Let the whole town hear. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, shaking. "It just happened," he muttered. "We didn't mean," I slammed my hand on the table so hard the glasses rattled. "Didn't mean you didn't mean to destroy your mother's memory. You didn't mean to spit on the roof over your head. You didn't mean to tear apart the family I built with my hands." My voice rose now, the fury I had kept buried erupting like a volcano. My wife reached for me, tears streaming down her face. "Please listen. We can fix this. We can." I pulled my arm away as if her touch were fire. "Fix this. You call this broken thing fixable? You've been sneaking into hotels with my son, planning to strip me of everything I own, and you think we can patch it with an apology." Daniel's wife stood trembling, her chair clattering to the floor. She turned to him, her eyes blazing through tears. "We are finished," she spat. "Don't come near me again." She stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The three of us remained, my wife sobbing, Daniel staring at the floor, and me standing tall, my dignity sharper than any blade. I looked at them both, my voice now calm, steady, final. "You thought I was blind. You thought age had dulled my mind, my eyes, my heart. But I see more than you ever imagined, and now everyone will see too." I picked up the notebook, the photos, the drive. "This is not just between us anymore. You wanted to conspire against me. You wanted to take what I built. You wanted to humiliate me in silence, then you will face humiliation in the open." I opened the door loud enough for the neighbors outside to hear. Their curious faces already peered from porches drawn by the shouting. I stepped into the yard holding the tie high in the air. "Behold," I said, my voice carrying into the night, "the truth of my wife and my son." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Windows opened, people whispered, pointed. The truth spread like fire. Behind me, my wife begged, "Please don't." But it was too late. The truth was free and it would never be caged again. Now I ask you, if you were me, standing at that table, watching the people you trusted most crumble before undeniable proof, would you have exposed them publicly, or would you have kept the shame behind closed doors? Comment with "okay" if you would drag the truth into the light. The days that followed were like standing in the ruins of a fire. The blaze had consumed everything: lies, secrets, masks, and what remained was silence, ashes, and the faint smell of betrayal still clinging to the walls. The neighbors avoided their eyes when they passed me, not out of pity, but out of respect. They had seen what I had endured, and they knew the truth now belonged not just to me, but to the entire street, the entire community. Daniel left town 2 days after the confrontation. He packed his things in the middle of the night, thinking no one noticed. But I stood at the window and watched his car drive away without a sound. He did not say goodbye. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply vanished the coward's way, leaving behind a trail of shame his name would never escape. My wife tried to stay. She begged, at first kneeling on the kitchen floor, clutching at my hands. "We can rebuild. We can forget," she pleaded, but her tears no longer moved me. I looked at her and saw not the woman I married, not the partner of my life, but a stranger who had worn a mask for 40 years. Her suitcase was on the porch by the end of the week. When she left, she did not look back. The house was quiet then. Too quiet. For the first time in decades, I was alone under this roof. The silence that once felt like suffocation now felt like liberation. No lies behind closed doors. No perfume masking the stench of deceit. Only the honest sound of my own breathing, steady and alive. I took the evidence, the photos, the videos, the notebook, and locked them away. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted them preserved. Proof that I had not been mad. Proof that I had seen clearly when everyone thought I was just an old man losing his mind. They would remain there as a monument, a reminder that even in the twilight of life, a man's dignity is not something to be stolen. Word spread quickly. In the market, women whispered about the scandal. Men nodded at me with quiet respect. Some offered sympathy, others offered anger on my behalf. But I needed neither. I needed only peace. I walked among them with my head high, not because I had won, but because I had not been broken. At night I sat on the porch and listened to the crickets. I thought of the boy I had raised, the woman I had loved, and the years that had been stolen from me. There was grief, yes, but beneath it was a strange kind of relief. The mask had fallen. The truth, however ugly, had set me free. One evening, Mrs. Jenkins brought me a casserole, setting it gently on the table. She looked at me with kind eyes. "You're stronger than most men would have been," she said softly. I smiled faintly. Strength, I thought, doesn't always look like muscles or fists. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And what of love? I don't know if I will ever open my heart again. But I know this trust is a sacred thing. It is the foundation of everything. And when it is shattered, no matter how many apologies are spoken, it cannot be rebuilt the same. My wife destroyed it. My son spat on it. But I still carry it in my own way because it was mine to give, and I gave it fully. Their betrayal does not change who I am. So, I sit here now, telling you my story, not to wallow in pain, but to show that even in betrayal, even in humiliation, there is a path to dignity. They tried to take everything from me, my family, my home, my legacy, but they failed. Because a man's dignity is not given by others. It is forged inside him in silence and patience in the fire of betrayal. And now I ask you, my listener, what would you have done? Would you have burned it all down the moment you found out? Or would you have waited, gathered, and struck when the world was watching? If you believe in dignity over despair, comment with the number 1. If you believe patience is the weapon of the wise, comment with 9. Tell me, because I want to know how you would have carried this burden. Like this video if you believe betrayal always comes to light, no matter how deep it's buried. Subscribe if you want more stories that cut to the bone of family love and justice. And share in the comments where you are listening from so I know how far this story of mine has traveled. Because in the end, betrayal may break hearts, but dignity never dies.